So welcome, our remarkable colleague Sharon. We so appreciate your consistent leadership and solidarity. And at SETC, we always begin by acknowledging, giving thanks to our creator, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So Sharon, can you please share a little bit about your remarkable work with our listeners and viewers?
Thank you, Victor. And can I just acknowledge that is a great acknowledgement. I'm going to learn from you already. Our work, I'm very proud to be part of the team at Toronto Foundation. I've been there 7.5 years. And what is our work? Well, it is, in some ways, it's the work community foundations have always focused on, which is a commitment to be around to support community in the way it needs support, to be at service to community forever, and to be relevant. And so I think in some of some of our conversation, that relevance is something we've been striving for, especially being the community foundation in this city in Toronto, the most diverse city in the world, where 170 countries have umbilical cords to our residents, right? And so what does it mean to be a relevant community foundation today? I think it means being reflecting the city in our staff complement, in the kinds of partnerships that we form, and to try and respond to the needs of the city as it rapidly evolves in this incredibly changing time. In basic terms, we hold the funds of 900 Torontonians who want to do good in the city. We manage and invest money on behalf of a few levels of government to support gender equality and community engagement. And we support charities and their investment strategies. We're a values-aligned investment pooling partner, and lots of folks prefer to put their endowments with us than perhaps with private sector. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of what we do on a day-to-day basis. But what we try to do is fundamentally change the way philanthropy works in the city.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for your leadership, your candor, authenticity, and yeah, just all you do for so many. We give thanks. We appreciate you. So my next question, what's inspiring you right now? What has you curious, or what's keeping you up at night?
That's a very big question, since I didn't sleep much last night, Victor. And so, that there are things that are definitely concerning, but let's start with inspiration. I think what has really inspired me, particularly in the last few years, is just the sheer resilience of our neighbors here in Toronto, the people that we work with, those leading in the sector, the kinds of grassroots leadership and the collective action that seems to be really happening through the pandemic and at this stage, whatever we call the stage of life in the world. I'm really inspired by that resilience, and I also hate that the resilience is required, right? It's such a tough time for so many. Our vital signs report came out this year, and we know that 925,000 Torontonians are lonely 3 to 4 days a week. This represents a huge population of our neighbors. And so what keeps me up awake at night is what is going on that could exist in a city where 30% of our residents are living on $20,000 a year or less in income. The levels of inequality and inequity in Toronto keep me awake at night. But what inspires me as well, in terms of where I sit at Toronto Foundation and the work that we do, is that we actually have, and philanthropy is evolving in such a way that we have a lot of tools available to make us service to change. We have a wide range of stakeholders. I said we have 900 fund holders who actually have kind of hand raised to say, we care about Toronto, what can we do? We have an enormous, fabulous group of grantees, lots of Black-led, Indigenous-led organizations, equity-deserving communities that we support and partner with on some really good work. And so I feel like we're in a good position to influence change, and have a real ability. And I'm hoping folks see this in us. Our desire is to model um, the sharing of power. And so those are kind of a combination of the things that keep me awake at night and the things that are inspiring me right now.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much. As you know, I was born and raised in Toronto, and I couldn't agree more. The amounts of challenges and supports needed are daunting, and the work that you're doing is so vital, crucial, and impactful. So once again, I thank you. So my next is a perfect segue to my next question. What challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and what are some of the approaches or tactics you and your colleagues are taking to overcome these barriers and challenges?
So one of the things I always talk about, which is maybe a bit taboo for the head of a foundation to talk about, but the fact that there is inequity within the charitable sector itself. So the statistic I always obsess over, although it's starting to get dated, I don't think it has changed in the least, is that 66% of all donation revenue in this country goes to the top 1% of charities, which are the hospitals and universities. And let me be clear, I am not for a second suggesting people stop donating to their local hospitals or universities. I get why that is. I just want people to add other charities to the mix, right? It's not like, can not all of it go there, and could some of it go to the hardworking grassroots organizations that are doing the heavy lifting on the intractable problems in our society right now? And can we see a greater fairness in the kind of sharing of our abundance? So that's something that I think is a real barrier to solving some of the challenging issues. I think that the way that we have framed the role of donors in society, kind of donors as heroes, donors as individual heroes, needs to shift. I think recognizing that our grassroots leaders, I think, I remember coming to a Toronto Foundation from a big charity and starting to work with these smaller organizations and finding grassroots organizations that are 30 and 40 years old, like with long, rich histories in their communities. And this sort of this mythology in the donor world that if they're small, you can't trust them. And I'm like, no, 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 no. There's so much excellence happening at the grassroots. And so how do we find a way to introduce philanthropy into these spaces in a way that doesn't dominate with financial power, but actually respects the history and the experience of these organizations to know what community needs and give them the space to actually do what's needed? So undesignated multi-year gifts, supporting operations of these organizations, that's something we want to change. And then finally, I think a barrier is social cohesion. We're seeing a real breakdown in, even at a fundamental level, our ability to talk to each other. We did a giant study in 2022 on social capital in Toronto, which is a jargony way of saying our relationships with our neighbors, our family, and our friends. And we have seen that just start to fray at the edges in terms of people's sense of trust in each other and even just being involved. We've seen a 25% drop in donations and volunteering in the country, or in the country, but also in Toronto. So what are the solutions to that, Victor? Well, I think we're trying to offer really authentic opportunities for both the sector leadership and donors to get together and get to know each other and build bridges and real relationships with each other. We offer a donor learning curriculum, and we talk about things like identity and power and privilege. We talk about values, something I think we can all relate to, whatever kind of our position and our posture is. And then we're really trying to build engagement experiences where people feel welcomed, included, and connected, safe spaces for folks to be honest with each other and have some of the tougher conversations that we think need to happen to make our city better.
That's truly remarkable. I really appreciate your visionary leadership, and I couldn't agree more. Trust-based philanthropy is so needed. Donor capacity strengthening and engagements is so needed because a lot of high net worth individuals want to do good, but sometimes there is that continuum of understanding that the restrictions placed on intermediaries, wholesalers, the folks that are deploying the capital, create a dynamic where it actually lessens the impact. And most importantly, if COVID didn't teach us anything, it taught us that relationships cannot be built in crisis. Relationships must be built with these smaller grassroots organizations, SPOs and CSOs, community service organizations, over a period of time because they're on the ground doing the work. And we've seen it where capital needs to be deployed quickly, and who's closest to the problem? It's these same groups you're talking about. So once again, I applaud you and your remarkable team for the work that you're doing on all fronts and the way you, the deep introspection and vantage points and perspectives you're looking at this pervasive challenge that we've had in philanthropy for probably centuries. And I wouldn't even say decades, probably centuries.
Yep.
So I appreciate you. So my next question, do you have a set of key priorities right now in your work?
Well, we before we got on this call, I think I mentioned we're heading into strategic planning. So I'm now, 7 years in. We've just finishing a 5-year plan that really doubled down on all of the things I just described in terms of engaging donors and grassroots together in a new kind of relationship and journey. And so we're starting to ask ourselves, so what's the next evolution of our organization? Where do we go from here? How do we remain relevant? What does community need from us? And so that's a big priority right now. It's taking up a lot of my mental space, and it in a good way is keeping me awake at night because I got all the ideas flowing. I have to say, I was with one of our partners yesterday, and we were talking about that there's a I'm not for a second saying people are better after what we've been through the last number of years, but I'm definitely feeling more energy towards a forward momentum. And I personally am feeling more zest. So I'm excited about this phase of being able to kind of rethink where we go from here based on all we've built. This work around social capital is going to be at the core of it in some way. Our vital signs report that came out in November, we actually, for the first time in 20 years, laid out a social capital layer onto vital signs, like as a filter. So for every one of our issue areas, what does that look like from a personal connection standpoint? And we launched this campaign called The Power of Us, looking for people to get back involved in their community. And I want to know what, is The Power of Us a campaign or a permanent rallying cry for Toronto Foundation? So that's a priority in terms of figuring out where do we go from here. And then we've really, in the last 7 years, really made a commitment to truth and reconciliation. We signed the Declaration of Action with the Circle. And so a fundamental strategic question we have is, again, how are we recommitting, and what would recommitting to truth and reconciliation look like for Toronto Foundation? We've vastly increased the percentage of granting we do to Indigenous-led organizations from virtually nothing when I arrived 7 years ago to about 25% of our discretionary grants going to Indigenous-led organizations. That's great, but there's still that's just that's just money. What other actions are we taking? Could we do an Indigenous vital signs report? Not for, but with the community in Toronto. And so these are big questions that I have and big priorities.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for your leadership, especially around the work in terms of truth and reconciliation. In terms of the ongoing rallying cry around the power of us, I agree completely. We have a proverb, Ubuntu, I am because we are. And I think that the power of us is a beautiful sentiment. And yeah, I just appreciate your leadership. So my next question, how do you feel about the future of philanthropy? Are you hopeful? Are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic? Where are you sitting right now in this work?
This one's the hard question. I feel uncertain is what I feel. I feel that there are a lot of tensions, and I don't know where things are going to land. I mean, I don't think it is an original thing to be looking at 2024 and the amount of global shifts that are taking place in our world right now, whether we look at the conflicts that exist out there, of course, most kind of recently in the Middle East, but so much conflict. looking at all the elections that are going to take place in the next 12 to 18 months. And, I saw a stat recently that, half of the world's population is going to the polls, right, in the next 18 months. And what is the world going to look like? How will it be organized? And so, believe it or not, I coincide that all at a micro level in our own city to say, how does that all affect the fact? And I gave you the stat earlier that 25% of of volunteers drop in volunteering, and a 25% drop in donations. The sad truth is we have lots of folks in Toronto that are food insecure, but we have wealthy feeling financially fragile right now, which I know is hard to get your head wrapped around, right? And yet that's the tail of that is not giving. And so I'm very nervous about philanthropy. Those of us who have endowed funds, that money will keep flowing, but we need more than that. We need a community of philanthropy. We need individuals and companies and others to be generous at this time when they're feeling vulnerable. And so that worries me about philanthropy. The other thing that's really worrying me even more recently is what I'm sensing as a backlash against the DEI work that's been happening over the last few years. And, I recognize that some of the work, is now being called wokeness. And there's a whole new language and vernacular of pushback on the important work around equity. And I'm worried about that and what that will do to fray relationships and opportunities. And just this general, it's not, I actually think trust scores are not bad in the world, but there's a story that we are fully polarized in this country. And I don't fully believe it, but the more that story is told, the more we collectively believe it. And so those are the things that make me very uncertain about where philanthropy is going.
That's remarkably helpful. I appreciate your leadership so much. And yeah, once again, your authenticity. Yeah, the ESG pushback, the DEI pushback is troublesome, but I almost laugh at the DEI pushback because when people bring that up, I'm like, we're so past DEI. We're at Jade. We're at justice, access,
Yeah.
inclusion, indigenize, diversity, decolonization, and equity. Like we're so far past the sentiments of DEI that was, I think that those folks can push back, but I think at the end of the day, what's right is right. And as Martin Luther King said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it leans towards justice. So I don't concern myself. I think we live in an abundant space. And yeah, the moral arc leans towards justice. So I think those folks doing the work to centering people, planets, and recognizing that people and planets and all species and life forms on this planet, flora and fauna, should be centered, will always be in a position of abundance and be able to propel the work, the important work. So, but I appreciate that, and I couldn't agree more. We do live in depolarized times, the poly crisis, and a lot going on. So, the uncertainty is real, and I appreciate once again your vulnerability and your candor.
And the power of us is important, right? The power of, the willing to come together and solve problems together instead of on their own. Or there's no single organization or person or institution that is going to solve all of these things. And so I really want us to be linking arms right now, not cutting off relations, right?
Absolutely. We can't become good swimmers. Let's keep these bridges strong. So my second last question, what is your ultimate goal? And what does success look like and feel like to you and your colleague?
So I would say right now, success for Toronto Foundation as an organization will look like us maximizing all of our assets for good. And what I mean by that is our relationships, our stakeholders, getting ourselves aligned and in support of and in service to, but also our actual financial assets. So we hold and manage 800 million in invested funds. And I'm so thrilled to say that in the middle of the pandemic, we brought on a new outsourced chief investment officer, a woman a wonderful firm led by a woman named Sandy Beschloss, who leads a very powerful socially responsible investment strategy for her 20-year-old firm. And we are moving all our assets into positive socially responsible investments over the next 5 years. And so that 100% asset for good piece for us is about our relationships and our influence doing good things, and all of our money doing good things, not just the granting part of it. So that's kind of our organizational success. I think for philanthropy as a whole, I think success looks like really inspiring this new way of looking at philanthropy, targeting our small, medium-sized orgs, giving to equity deserving communities and with undesignated gifts, and creating a kind of safer and more equal playing field. And then I think success for Toronto looks like, turning the city of neighborhoods into a city of neighbors, where we like deeply care about the humanity of each other, and legitimately are curious about each other and want to get to know each other again. And so I think those are the things I think about when I think about what success looks like.
That's beautiful. Turning a city of neighborhoods into a city of neighbors. Ashe, I couldn't agree more. So my last question, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action for our listeners and viewers?
Well, I would love everyone to read our most recent Vital Signs report. It's on our website. It's very easy to find. And there's an executive summary for people like me who can't read the 70-page research reports. Although it's a very accessible report, I think very actually an interesting read with lots of voices of community leaders. So please read the Vital Signs report from 2023. It's only a couple months old and the data is going to be good for 2 years. Secondly, we'll love for folks to consider doing some kind of civic optimistic action, whether that's rejoining something you left behind during the pandemic, volunteering somewhere, donating to a cause you've forgotten, particularly at the grassroots level. Love for folks to go right with our Vital Signs report is the Power of Us action map. So get involved in your city again. And if you need any help with it, and if there's any way Toronto Foundation as your community foundation can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're here to help. Look at our Good to Give guide if you're looking for a place to donate. We've got lots of great suggestions of organizations we've supported and want to see other people support.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Madasi Papa. I give thanks for your remarkable humility, authenticity, and your visionary leadership and consistent solidarity. And as always at SETC, we close the way we began, by acknowledging and giving thanks to our Creator, by acknowledging and giving thanks to the original stewards, the various lands we're on. We acknowledge all our ancestors, all those who toiled without compassionate compensation. We acknowledge all our elders and community stalwarts, whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Thank you so much, Sharon. We so appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me.